Let me welcome everybody to the Future Trends Forum. I'm Brian Alexander. I'm your host, cat herder, agent provocateur today, and we'll be discussing emerging technologies with Phil Long. Now, just to get everyone situated, let's take a look at a little background about Shindig. Next slide, please. First of all, the Future Trends Forum is a project of the Future Trends in Technology and Education report, which is a monthly trends analysis and environmental scan. The latest issue just came out a few days ago, and we're now preparing for the June issue. So please go to ftte.us if you'd like to get more background and more information about that. I'd like to thank a couple of agencies who've supported us very generously. First, NiserNet from New York State, which has been supporting Future Trends for some time. We thank them very much for the generosity. And we'd also like to thank Shindig, because they have done two tremendous things for us. First, they provide the technology we're using right now, and I'll say a few words about that in a second, but they've also been providing really, really wonderful staff who have been extremely helpful. So I thank Shindig very much for that. Now, speaking of technology, if you're new here, or if you need a refresher, the space here is divided into two strata. The very, very top is called the stage. That's where I am, and you can see me waving at you with a shiny whiteboard behind me. And over here, next to me, is either a little PowerPoint stack, which we're just about done with, or that's where our guests are going to be. So the stage is where we speak from, where everyone gets to hear. Down below, in the second half, you can see a swarm of icons. Those are all participants. That's the audience. And you can see some of them have images, some of them have video feeds. Each one of those represents a different person signing in from somewhere in the world. And as we go, you'll see those icons move back and forth, in part as people perhaps come and go, but also as they connect with each other. So if you'd like to talk to somebody, you can just click on them and you'll get your own private sound bubble so you can speak to them. Now, if you'd like to contribute to our discussion, if you have observations to share or questions, there are 4 ways of doing that. So if you look in the very bottom right of the screen, you'll see 2 orange buttons. One of them has the word raise, a picture of a hand like this. If you click that button, that tells us that you'd like to speak. So assuming you've got a microphone and hopefully video, when the time is right, we'll bring you up on stage. So we'll kick off either me or Phil, probably me, and you'll get to be up here and speak to us. And we're happy to have that happen, and that will happen very soon. If you don't want to speak out loud, for whatever reason, you're shy or you don't have a working camera and mic, it's okay. You can click the ask button, that orange one, and that basically is a kind of super chat or a message that comes to us and says, here's my question or comment. So we'll get that, and then I can read that out loud to carry on a conversation. 2 more venues. You can use a chat box. So if you go to your cursor or to your avatar and mouse over it, you'll see a bunch of little boxes open. One of them is the phrase, I am chat. If you click that, I'll bring up a chat box for everyone in your room. Shindig can hold hundreds, even thousands of people. And one of the ways it processes that is by segmenting us into rooms. Each room holds roughly 15 people. So when you can chat to your whole room, or you can chat to individuals as well. Now, if you'd like to move between rooms, if you put your cursor on the bottom left of the screen, a little tab that says mingle, click that, and you'll see a scroll of every person participating. So if you find a friend or someone interested, you can jump there and switch rooms. The 4th way to participate, and again, we're really keen on this, is by Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, please tweet either at me, Brian Alexander, or use the hashtag, best of all, FTTE. And we'll be noticing that, we'll be scrolling through that during the course of the discussion, and we'll storify the tweets as they come up. So the reason we have so many channels is because we really, really want your conversation. We want your thoughts, your pushbacks, your provocations, your feedback. And about halfway through today's session, Phil and I will be talking, and then we're going to break, and then we have our own mingle session. So I will give you all a charge or something to think about, something that came up out of our discussion. And we'll take about 5 minutes, and you get to pair off or group into 3s or 4s of people and discuss that. So you'll get a chance to click on somebody and share sound and video with them. Phil and I will also be moving around, jumping on people and saying, hey, what do you think about this? If you don't want to participate, that's fine. Just keep your screen black, or just say you don't want to join up. That's fine. In fact, on your avatar. There's a little option to lock your screen so we can't connect with you unless we have your permission. But otherwise, we'd love to talk. Think about a discussion phrase when the presenter in an auditorium or seminar says, now talk amongst yourselves, and everybody does. So that's all the context, that's the framework, that's the environment we're inhabiting for this hour. Let me introduce you now to our guest. So Phil Long is a good friend of mine. Phil is based currently at the University of Texas in Austin. His background includes working at MIT as well as working University of Queensland, right, Phil?
Yes.
As long as I've known him, Phil has been one of the leaders in higher education internationally, thinking about emerging technology and emerging practices. He's someone who has worked heavily in everything from data to automation to new learning spaces. So he's someone I really, really wanted to have on here. Now, it's hard to pin him down. Phil's in demand literally worldwide. I have to think of him as an electron constantly whirling around, but we've got him for the next hour. We'll be talking about higher education and emerging technology. So Phil, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks very much, Brian. It's a pleasure. I've been watching your career over the many, many years, and it's a lovely thing to see it mature as it has.
Well, thank you. And nonetheless, you came to my session. Very good. Very good.
Despite that shows how deep the friendship is.
I know. So I'd like to begin, if we could, by talking about a very interesting, intriguing, and controversial technology called blockchain, or the blockchain database. I'd like to ask you if you could just take a quick sketch of helping explain what this is. I know it's tricky, it's a devious technology, but then let's talk about how this can be used in higher education.
It is subtle because in some sense, the easiest way to think about it is nothing more than a transparent distributed ledger where the ledger is a proxy for a database, and each record or row on the ledger represents a transaction of some sort, where that transaction can be the execution of an agreement, or that transaction could be the awarding of some recognition of some fashion, or it could be the sale of a house. So in one sense, the blockchain idea is the method by which the creation of that ledger has been done in a form that makes it incredibly secure and visible. And in the case of its origins, which comes from cryptocurrency, distributed across all the members of the organizations or groups or participants that are involved in the community that the transaction took place in. So in the purest sense, it's nothing more than a new database, and that's why some people have questioned, well, it's just another back-end database environment, and where's the news here? And that's a reasonable concern to have. In terms of higher education, because it is in fact recording transactions, the obvious first place that people have thought about applying it is to credentialing, because a credentialing is the ultimate transaction that higher education engages in with learners, and in some sense, one might argue it is the single most and perhaps only truly distinctive social contribution in many ways that the university makes that's unique to a university, that notion of publicly awarding a credential and recognition of achievement of something.
Well, isn't teaching and research also the way academia does that? Isn't that also unique?
Certainly those things, there's the discovery aspect, there's the social community and community commitment aspect that are part of the university. But if you're looking at the question of what is sort of the unique social value of a university and a community and an economy, one of the things that it does uniquely, and that the most social organizations and countries uniquely sanction in the sense of give permission to universities to do, is to anoint someone with having a certain degree of understanding of a discipline in terms of an AA degree or a BA degree or something like that. And it's truly one of the clear and significant centralized functions that universities have. And of course, they do all the rest of the wonderful contributions in terms of exploration and discovery and asking the difficult and often controversial questions in a way that's hopefully gives them the sanction and permission to do that. But the credentialing issue is a big one, and it is an important function that universities have. And ironically, it's the thing that in recent years has become almost less and less valued by the very community, particularly the business community that looks at the output of universities, because requests for transcripts are dropping. And transcripts are the recognition, the document that identifies what you have accomplished at a university in one sense. So back to the original question about a blockchain, the blockchain has the potential of being an immutable, meaning a record that can't be modified, changed, or easily hacked, record of an individual learner's accomplishments, and potentially one that can be disclosed at one level in a public context with a certain amount of information, but because the encryption that it goes into the formation of a block involves both a public and a private key, you can have those aspects that you wish to have remain private, kept private, and only accessible to someone to whom you give your private key. So it starts to add some interesting elements. The single thing that attracted me to it is the potential that it has to affirm the learner's ownership of their own record. Right now, when a transaction is made and you get a credential from an institution, you may get the piece of paper, and if they're modern, you may get a little laminated card that looks like a diploma, and some places are even developing a digital diploma. But ultimately, anybody that wishes to verify that that's real goes back to the source and says to the institution, is this person actually the person that you gave the diploma to that has these characteristics? And they say yes or no. The interesting problem that raises in current contemporary times is that many learners will have earned credentials in one fashion or another from a range of institutions. And the notion that you go to one university for training for your career is now quite passé. And the reality is that most of us will be going through a lifelong learning interaction and accumulating these records. And yet, in order for any one person to validate the list, they're going to have to go back to every single source that offered it to you. And so what attracted me to the blockchain initially was, is this a way that kind of intermediary chain can be broken? And the assertion of the authenticity of this thing is made at the time it's created, not at the time. There's no need to validate it thereafter.
It's baked in.
It's baked in.
I wonder if this is the kind of thing that state governments, or better yet, federal and national governments would be interested in, either supporting or trying to own.
Well, certainly, if you look at the report from the Office of Science at the United Kingdom, they put out a report relatively recently, late last year, which basically lists from their perspective the possibility of blockchains in the terms of government services. And the country of Estonia is using them in voting context for identity validation of a voter. There are all kinds of ways that this have emerged, where this could in fact be an incredibly valuable mechanism to authorize and otherwise transact public services that are much simpler and easier to manage. And frankly, scaring the heck out of a lot of people, because its fundamental characteristic is the elimination of intermediaries, which is one of the reasons why the financial industry became so excited when Bitcoin was created.
So you have disintermediation, and we have a strong sense of disruption. Speaking of disruption, again, those of you who are new to Shindig, let me just give you an example of how this works. We've got a question from one participant. This is from Ted Newcomb. And Ted asks, will that incorporate MOOCs and all the alternative ways to learn and be credentialed outside of brick and mortar institutions?
The you can use and employ the blockchain environment in essentially any context that you can creatively imagine. So indeed, if an institution wants to use the vehicle of a MOOC as a delivery mechanism and believes that they have a way, or they're confident in asserting that the individual who has successfully completed it has made the accomplishments that they have done, then the answer is absolutely yes. And it would mean potentially that the learner could have a record of their learning from MOOCs, from professional development activities of organizations, societies, etc., universities. And if you take it to its furthest extreme, which is where it gets really interesting, a good colleague from France, Serge Rivet, has suggested that one of the things that you could do is have the opportunity to essentially exchange social capital amongst individuals. We are a community here in Shindig. If you like and are getting value out of the work that is represented by the way in which Brian has pulled together different members of community on these periodic sessions, you've gotten value out of that. In Serge's view of the world, you'd have a little application, kind of Twitter-like, where you could, through the hashtag, if you will, offer to Brian a social piece of capital that says, I valued this interaction, and it would go into Brian's blockchain. And there would be an accumulation of that exchange of affirmation, in this case, of reputation in some sense, or social capital, that he would accrue. And you can see that as as something that the community does amongst itself, and that's sort of the anarchistic extreme of this idea.
Well, it is, but and of course, I love the idea of getting more social capital. But I can imagine several other educational uses. One offhand strikes me that in scholarly publication, it would be interesting to see this as a kind of alternative to citations, where people can give researchers credit, and again, that would be distributed. I mean, scholarly publication is fairly anarchistic. There's no one authority. It's a distributed system. But I wonder if this would be an interesting way of measuring citation influence.
It could do that. One thing that has been really an issue in the scholarly publication space is the recognition on the part of all of the reviewers and the work that reviewers do in their vetting of scholarly work, and by and large, they get there's little visibility to that, and in their professional life, they can put down they were a reviewer for Journal X, but that doesn't give anything like the relative effort that they spent on that. And you can imagine a block environment where being a reviewer is recognized by the editor, and that writes to your blockchain that contribution, which simply accumulates then, and you can make available to others as you wish.
Then I think we have a whole business model that we just offered to the world. Please enjoy. We have a question. Another question came up from Paul Baldridge, who asks, is the thought that a learner needs to create a Bitcoin wallet in order for them to store and or share their credentials? Good question, Paul.
Good question. And the question of where you store the actual representation of the transactions is a good one. So one of the things that highlights is you're obviously aware then that the whole blockchain environment was a back end to the creation of cryptocurrency, with Bitcoin being the originator of that process, or that development. And in order for those, in the case of cryptocurrency, the coins had to be instantiated in something, and so they created the sort of Bitcoin icon, and a place needed to be able to put this digital thing, and they called that the Bitcoin wallet. There are, so separate for the moment the currency side of Bitcoin. Bitcoin, in some sense, is a representation of a value exchange, and so I don't want to go into all of the sort of the back end stuff that goes into making the currency valuable by its scarcity. Instead, the question I think that you're asking, which is a good one, is so where does this stuff live? Do you have to put it in something like a wallet or the like? And the answer is there has to be some receptacle for it, because there is this database in the Bitcoin world, which is referred to as a permissionless distributed blockchain environment. What that means is that there's actually a full transactional record, that is a full blockchain, for every single transaction that's ever taken place amongst participants in that currency community. So Brian would have a blockchain, I would have a blockchain, you would have a blockchain, and
Right.
in it would be that record of your stuff along with everybody else. And so there's millions upon millions of replicate copies of this set of transactions. In the world that we're talking about in terms of credentialing and such, then it would be useful to have a place to store that. So you could call that your wallet or your learning credential store or your portfolio. There's a number of ways you could characterize that. And in that same permissionless model of Bitcoin, then every single learner would have one of these things. In fact, ultimately, you would have one running on your phone. And so you would have all of your credentials of your learning experience with at all times. So yes, there's a place like that would be needed, whether it's a portable thing in some sense, like the implications of a Bitcoin wallet, or whether it's a portfolio that you maintain someplace where those things are aggregated, becomes an implementation question. And it leads to the issue of, are we really going to go down the sort of anarchic route of every single participant having a full record of transactions, or are we going to do some fewer number of replications of the database environment of the distributed ledger that might be based around those people with vested interest in the overall system, which could be your institution, it could be your department within an institution may keep a copy, it could be the professional association that's about associated with the departmental discipline area that you're in, it could be the libraries, it could be any number of things. It needs to be more than one, because part of the essence of the security side of the blockchain environment is by having many replicates of it, the blockchains, in fact, check each other to make sure that there's a maintained integrity, kind of like a check bit, so to speak. And they validate periodically whether or not that's been manipulated as a way of making sure there hasn't been a hack. So having multiple of them increases that level of security in a way, but how many we need and who needs to run them is a question, and indeed raises the issue I think that, Brian, you raised a minute ago, which is, would governments be interested in this? Well, yes, you can use any technology for good or for evil, and so it could be that there could be a single blockchain that's run by a particular group, and if we get to that point, then it isn't all that different from any other database environment, although it might be somewhat secure. But I think it would.
And it might be distributed among a certain body, but it wouldn't necessarily be popularly distributed.
That's right, and it, in my view, sort of constrains the possible. And one of the really intriguing things about it is to use the phrase that Stephen Johnson popularized from a biologist named Stewart. And that's the adjacent possible. One of the things this is doing is contributing this tremendous richness to an ecosystem. And from that richness, variations can occur. And when variations occur, you get change.
You also get more and more questions. Our question queue is just building up like mad. One comes from Mark Wilson, who wants to know, are standards for blockchains being developed anywhere in the world?
They're being developed all over the place. The general architecture of the actual blockchain environment has not varied since whomever
Right.
Kakamoshi,
Sato. Yeah.
Sato, as it turns out to be. Whether that's Nick or somebody else remains to be seen. But that hasn't varied much at all. There have been lots of attempts to instantiate the method of doing distributed consensus that is inherent in the way the blockchain environment issues blocks. Most of them involve some form of proof of worth that has to do with the so-called mining concept. But in the context of credentialing and the like, the issue isn't to try to make these things scarce, but rather to make them secure. And so the need to have a proof of work kind of environment in there has to be rethought, because it's not a matter of solving an ever more complex puzzle in order to gain credibility to be able to participate, but rather to have other methods by which validation of membership and participation can be asserted. So the answer to the original question, are there people working on this all over the place? The answer is yes. So far, it has been, for reasons not entirely clear to me, although fortuitously, mostly transparent and open and in open source communities. And so the primary development activity has been done by companies like Ethereum, which produces their software as an open source environment. The work going on at the Linux Foundation, recently joined by IBM and others to try to push the technology there, and they've made that all open source as well. So there are things like that going on a lot of places.
Oh, terrific. That's a great question. And I think in many ways this, we might want to think about a follow-up to this today's session where we explore Bitcoin and blockchain a little more deeply, because there's a lot to this. But before I say more, Scott Walters has a question. And if the Shindig folks can just take me off the stage and put Scott up so he can talk to Phil.
Hi, Phil. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, Scott. Go right ahead.
So I'm a theater professor, and for me, writing for academic journals is less relevant than writing for people who are in the performing arts field, which has led me to have my own blog or write for online journals and things of that nature. But of course, that isn't included as sort of academic writing. And I'm wondering whether some of this, the things that you're talking about, would give an opportunity to indicate influence and maybe lead some of that writing to be more regarded as more legitimate.
And I think conceptually the answer, I think, is yes, in the sense that if you imagined that you extended, as we were talking earlier, about the idea that there was a way of your readership expressing the value of the contribution that you're making to them as an exchange, and you could accumulate that in some sort of visible fashion, and the method by which it's accumulated was secure and immutable, couldn't be hacked. You couldn't have your friends masquerading as 1,000 people in the outside and building up your credibility. That the answer to that would be yes. And one of the intriguing aspects of this is this community notion of, LinkedIn has the ability to endorse you for your writing, right? The problem is, of course, twofold. One is there is no criteria by which that endorsement is measured, and secondly, you can't decline one. That's the biggest problem of LinkedIn. Imagine if your writing was endorsed by somebody that you found absolutely reprehensible, and violated all of the values that you have associated with your perceptions of writing for the art community. there you would have in your list this person, and you're thinking, oh, crap, I would not the kind of reputational credibility I'm trying to get here. So there has to be a mechanism by which the acceptance of that currency is vetted by you. You have to be able to accept it. But yes, I know that people are working on that very kind of social exchange process to try to standardize, if you will. I think there's work that you've done that's valuable. Here's evidence of that work. I will link that to the transaction, so it's not a gratuitous, I'm endorsing you for wonderful art writing, but rather I'm endorsing you that, and here are 4 instances of things that you've contributed that I find highly useful. And that would be written into the block as part of the affirmation. And so you can imagine this as a means of making transparent and distributable the work that individuals do in various ways that we haven't been able to grasp, and I don't want to use a crass word, but in some sense commodify, that is, instantiate it to positive ends.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
It's a great question. Thinking through the possibilities of blockchain technology reminds me of what Canadian science fiction writer Kurt Schroeder told me. He said, thinking about this is like asking, what can we do with the web around 1996? There's a lot of this is a discussion focused on education and its future. So what I'd like to do right now is pause our presentation from up top, and I'd like to have 5 minutes where we mingle with each other. And the question I'd like you to consider is, where do you see possibilities for blockchain technology in education? So it could be some of the possibilities we've discussed so far. My crazy idea about scholarly communication, Phil's really cogent point about credentialing, and then a question we just heard about valuing writing. But think about where else this could go. Again, if you haven't been here, the way this works is Phil and I will disappear from the stage, and we're going to wander around and find other people to talk to. And so please click on somebody, join a conversation, and talk out loud. And again, if you don't want to, I understand. Just decline. I'll put a lock on your icon. But this is a great time to converse and see what other people are thinking. I really want to hear what the forum community has to say. So let's take 5 minutes and think, what can we do with blockchain in education? Let's go.
Nice talking to you as well. Cheers.
Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome back. I think we had about 20 distributed seminars just now, and I wish I had a ledger where I could record the conversations. That was really, really busy. There's a lot of ideas coming up. Phil, did you get some good conversations and good questions and thoughts?
Indeed. One of which was, we need a new name for this because no one's going to be flocking to badges or flocking to blockchains. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue and makes you kind of think of Cool Hand Luke or something. So that's work.
What we have here is a failure to demarcate.
That's right. And Pam is going to work on that.
Oh, good, Pam. I trust nobody better. Nobody better. We had a question. I had a couple of questions that came up, and one was from Patrice about privacy. Can we bring Patrice up in my place so she can ask this question? Because it's a killer.
Hi, Patrice.
So I had 2 questions. One was around privacy and, in what ways, can you, as a learner decide who has access to your records and who doesn't? And, are they editable at all? Can you, would you have the ability to, say, remove something from it? And my other question was around just like in general getting started. If you were an individual or, like a university, for example, how does somebody jump in and start using blockchain?
Okay, so the first question about privacy and visibility and editability. the blockchains are encrypted with a relatively secure hash. So far, no one has broken it, which since they've been trying in the context of doing this in the currency world, gives you some confidence that it's secure, because it hasn't been done yet. It is, you can have, there's as we talked about before, there's a public and a private key. So you can have a piece of the transaction that you want public visible, and if you don't want to have much there, you can just put very little in that visible component, and therefore only make available that more private stuff to the individuals that you wish to share it with. There are people that are thinking about extending this application environment so that there might be an application which allowed the owners, the people that own particular blocks in the chain, to effectively give access to the exposure of it to an application, and then in the application pick and choose the pieces that you want to make available to particular audiences. So there is some thought being given about adding some granularity and control over how you display things, other than simply here's a part that's visible and here's a part that's totally secured. It is not editable. That's one of the big philosophical issues about this whole methodology. In the EU, that would represent a real problem, I suspect, because in the European community, they believe in a right to anonymity and a right to choose what about their past record should be visible. The philosophy of the blockchain environment was that you can write a block that supersedes a prior block, but that you can't change history. So that whatever is in your historical record, in the view of the creators of this environment, is a legitimate and validated occurrence, and therefore you can't simply choose to delete pieces of history that you don't like anymore. What you can do is, if there's been a change, then you can add a new block that reflects that. And the other thing you can do is you can have, as part of the information in a block, an expiry, which says the information in here is valid until, in which case the block remains and says that, but it also says it's now out of date, kind of the sort of thing that you would find potentially useful in a medical education environment, for example, where you have to get continually recertified for the validity of your expertise in a particular area. In terms of, so I think that does the first part of the second part of your question again.
How do you get started?
How you get started. That's a tougher one, and because it's very, very germinal right now. So there's probably the simplest thing to do is to pick one of the blockchain environments, download, install it, and begin to get a feel for what it consists of. Now, right now, it's pretty technically challenging, so you need to have people around you who have that capability, or if you have that capability, then terrific. But I have a colleague here, for example, we downloaded the Ethereum environment, and he had that up and running in about 2 days' time. And we've been playing with it since then. To sort of track what's going on about the use of this thing and its potential viability, in a conversation I was in a chat, it's really focused by question or application. So the Berkman Center for Internet and Society has a group that's interested in blockchains around these things called smart contracts, which are applications in the blockchain environment, kind of like APIs with code behind them, that when the condition of the API is met, it executes the code, and that results in the transaction of some kind. And so if you go to the Berkman Society and you look for their smart contract and blockchain finance group, you'll find activity going on there. And if you were interested in credentialing, then there's a group of registrars that are following this environment, led primarily by people like Tom Black at Stanford, and here at UT Austin, Shelby Stanfield. So it really, in that sense, depends on application community. So far, there hasn't been sort of a generic space. I guess the best generic space is Audrey Waters, who's a blogger and columnist, and she's been putting out periodic posts on the development of blockchains and maintains a linked database of all kinds of articles and publications that are on that topic. So I would highly recommend checking her.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to crow that Audrey Waters was the very first guest on the Future Trends Forum back in February of this year.
Excellent choice.
Oh, I thought so. I thought so. Let me just say, folks in the audience, if you have more questions and comments, don't be shy about clicking the raise hand button. That'll tell us that you want to come up like Patrice so helpfully just did and volunteer some information. Along those lines, we had a question from AD. Abram had a question about the size of where blockchain use could come from. Can we bring up AD if he's still here?
Hello.
Hello.
So I was really taken with your discussion of applications such as credentialing and thinking about what would the adoption patterns look like. So we know in a lot of cases with open standards, incumbents aren't necessarily eager to adopt them because it's giving up a certain kind of first mover advantage, and you see more likely that the disruptors organizations are going to jump in there. Of course, you mix in the legacy of cryptocurrency and hacker culture as potential liabilities in terms of kind of a cultural climate thing. I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts on where you see the early adopters that could drive more of a mass adoption coming from, either in terms of sector or particular actors.
My guess is in terms of more mainstream adoption, it's going to likely be one of the sort of high brand recognition institutions that decide to do this for either a particular discipline area or attribute of their community. And one of the places it might be one sort of a little bit on left field are the extracurricular activities around a university experience. One of the challenges universities have is articulating the value of place in an institution, and we've been co-opted by a sort of a Silicon Valley narrative that has unbundled everything and getting smaller and smaller pieces, and all of our services being thought of in very small increments. But the whole experience of being a university is more than just the sum of taking a class and turning in papers and getting recognition for this, that, and the other thing. It is that often amorphously described surround that is part of an academic scholarly community. So it could very well be coming as from the left field in the sense of the recognition of the richness of that, and that's in that context. There's only 3 universities I know of that have done this so far, and one of them is University of Nicosia, of all places, and the second is not a whole university, but rather a particular group of fellows at the Media Lab. So Media Lab now issues blockchain-based authentication that you're a fellow with them. And those are the first 2 sort of institutional places I've seen recognition of that emerging using this environment. You're right. The likelihood is that all of the things I'm talking about will be completely off base because someone will come out of the woodwork with the implementation of this for some community that we haven't even heard about, but which will make perfect sense in retrospect once it emerges. So it could be, the Juggler Society or something like that that ends up being the right place for this to become demonstrated.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Abram. I think at this moment my head is spinning with possibilities, and I think we could turn this into an ebook simply called The Future Trends Forum Explores the Blockchain. It's a real privilege just to hear all these very, very well-informed questions. I've got one more to throw to you, Phil. This came in private chat from Shelley Alcorn. She asked, will we be able to use blockchain to build connections between post-secondary and the association community for the purposes of certifications, etc. So association community, you understand? Okay.
I think so. And the answer is, I think it creates a level playing field in some sense, because if the communities are willing to play together at all, the intersecting point is the learner who is a member of both. And if they're all issuing recognition of achievement via the contribution and or validated, if you will, or certified contribution, if for lack of a better phrase, that an individual might be making to an association or in their academic work or in their contribution to philanthropy, for that matter. It all funnels back into that recognition, which can be part of one's social record. And I think that this leads to a very, very interesting, and some people would say concerning, because it is permanent and unmutable, but it is the instantiation of the bits of bits of our the ripples of our engagement in our communities, and so it has the opportunity for being both disruptive but also remarkably equitable and socializing across communities. At least that's the positive spin. The negative spin is your sins are with you forever.
It goes down your permanent record.
That's right. And the reality is that we all have those sins, and so maybe it isn't such a bad thing to recognize that we're flawed people.
That was David Brenn's argument back in the 1990s in Transparent Society, where he thought that if we have a serious reduction of privacy, then eventually we'll basically just chill out because we'll all be used to finding somebody in an embarrassing position. I think of that as the Southern California aesthetic, but it's an optimistic way. This was in many ways the Second Life people. That was their approach, and it didn't work, right? But we'll see.
Well, go ahead.
I hate to pump, but we're right at the end of the hour. I guess one of the extra learnings we just got is that blockchain accelerates time at relativistic velocities. Friends, I'm going to stick around for about 15 minutes after this, just if we have more ideas, comments, and thoughts. And Phil, you're welcome to stay as long as you can. I know you're incredibly busy.
I will stay as long as I can.
But let me just, for the interest of everybody who blocked out an hour, let me wrap this up carefully. Shindig folks, if you could bring up this slide for Phil, because I want to show people how to find him. So if you'd like to learn more about Phil, and after this hour, I'm sure everyone would have to. You can see a little background about him on the About Me page and his homepage. You can also track him on Twitter. And there are a few links there. You can see to the European Union LACE project about privacy and ethics for data. And then on the very bottom, a link to a really interesting MIT project that about micro degrees that we haven't gotten to yet, but I strongly recommend taking a look at. I think we should bring Phil back. I'm blown away by his ability to explain this and to give us so many great ideas. Now, next week, we have another guest. We have Maya Georgieva, who's going to be talking about more emerging technologies. Maya is going to discuss wearable computers, virtual reality, mixed media, augmented reality. So everything from virtual reality to Magic Leap will be on the table and around. Now, the schedule for that is important. There's an important change. It's not next Thursday. It's next Tuesday. Same time, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but next Tuesday. So if you'd like to find out more about Maya, check out her Twitter feed or her consultancy, Digital Bodies. I think it's a terrific topic. She's a lot of fun, very, very smart, a lot to discuss about this subject. Speaking of subjects, let me just thank everybody for participating, contributing so much. I think that the Shindig did a great job in backing it, but I want to say that participants, you've made the Future Transform a very, very vibrant intellectual community for exploring the future of education and technology. Now, if you'd like to stick around for a few minutes and talk, I'll be here, but otherwise, thank you so much. Watch my blog, because we'll have recordings, notes, and Storify up. And meantime, see you next week.